never thought love could feel like a battlefield. When I first met Adam, I believed he was the safe place I had always searched for. A man who would see me, not just my struggles, and accept me as I was. For years, I fought alone, juggling 2 jobs, sacrificing sleep, building dreams out of scraps of paper, always holding on to the hope that someday things would be easier. And when Adam came into my life, it felt like the universe had finally thrown me a rope. He had the smile of a man who never knew hunger, the confidence of someone raised with doors already open. I remember the way he used to tell me, "You're stronger than you think. I love how hard you fight." His words made me feel seen, as if my pain was proof of my worth. But that's the thing about words. They're easy to say when times are good. The cracks started small. Little comments, disguised as jokes. "Maybe you should get a real job, babe." Or, "It's cute that you're trying so hard, but maybe you're just not cut out for more." At first, I brushed them off. Maybe he was teasing. Maybe I was overthinking. After all, he still held me close at night, still whispered "I love you" when the lights went out. But words are seeds, and his began to take root in me. I grew up with struggle woven into every thread of my life. My mother worked as a seamstress, her hands calloused from years of stitching other people's dreams. My father left when I was 12, his absence a wound that never quite healed. College was a battlefield, every tuition bill a mountain, every exam a storm. I worked late shifts at a diner, saving tips in a crack jar, surviving on coffee and borrowed hope. Adam knew all of this. He knew the sacrifices I had made, the nights I cried myself to sleep from exhaustion, the hunger I swallowed to keep moving. He told me once that my resilience was what drew him in. But somewhere along the way, my resilience turned into his weapon. The night everything began to change is burned into my memory. We were at his friend's birthday dinner, a fancy restaurant I couldn't afford if I had been alone. I had saved for weeks just to buy a simple dress, something that made me feel like I belonged among his polished circle of friends. The conversation flowed easily at first. Laughter, drinks, stories from childhood. I sat quietly, smiling, trying to keep up with tales of expensive vacations and internships handed down through family connections. And then one of his friends turned to me and asked, "So what do you do?" I answered honestly, "I'm working 2 jobs right now, and I'm finishing my degree part-time. It's tough, but I'm getting there." Before I could even finish, Adam laughed. A sharp, careless laugh that cut me deeper than any insult could. He leaned back in his chair, smirking. "Yeah, she's always hustling. It's kinda her thing. She's like, addicted to struggling. Honestly, sometimes I wonder if she even knows how to relax or if she just likes being broke." The table erupted in laughter. And I sat there, frozen, my face burning, my throat dry. I looked at him, the man I thought loved me, and all I saw was mockery. He didn't see my resilience anymore. He didn't see my sacrifices. He saw entertainment. A joke at his dinner table. And in that moment, something inside me cracked. That night, I went home early. I pretended to be tired, kissed him on the cheek, and smiled so no one would notice the storm brewing inside me. But when I shut my bedroom door, I broke. The tears came fast, hot, unrelenting. My hands shook as I replayed his words over and over, each echo louder than the last. He mocked me. In front of everyone. And for what? For laughs? For approval from his rich friends? I pressed my fists into my chest as if I could crush the pain away. But I knew deep down this wasn't the end. No, this was only the beginning. Because love without respect is a slow poison. And he had just given me my first fatal dose. I wish I could tell you that after that dinner, Adam apologized. That he pulled me aside, admitted he crossed a line, and promised never to humiliate me again. But the truth? He didn't even notice the damage he caused. When I brought it up the next morning, his reaction cut even deeper. He smirked and said, "Babe, you're being dramatic. It was just a joke." Everyone laughed, didn't they? Don't be so sensitive. Sensitive. That word tasted like venom on my tongue. For a while, I tried to convince myself maybe he was right. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe the years of struggling made me fragile. So I swallowed my pride. forced a smile, and carried on. But deep down, something inside me was breaking, and Adam, whether he realized it or not, kept pressing his fingers against the cracks. It started becoming a pattern. At parties, around his friends, even during casual dinners, he'd make comments that felt like daggers wrapped in velvet. She's basically married to her student loans. Don't ask her about vacations. Her version of a getaway is surviving finals week. She's so used to struggling, she doesn't know what it's like to have nice things. Each laugh from the people around us chipped away at me. Each smirk from him felt like betrayal. I wasn't his partner anymore. I was his punchline. But here's the thing about pain. You can bury it, you can smile through it, but eventually it grows roots. And those roots turn into fire. One night, after a particularly humiliating gathering where Adam had joked about how I didn't even know what fine wine was, I found myself standing in front of the mirror. I barely recognized the woman staring back. Her eyes looked hollow, her smile forced, her spirit dimmed. That night, I whispered to my reflection, if he thinks I'm weak, he's about to learn just how strong I can be. But strength doesn't come overnight, and neither does revenge. I decided to wait, to watch, to let him dig his own grave while I quietly rebuilt myself. I worked harder, saved more, planned carefully. Every cruel word he threw at me became fuel. Every laugh at my expense was a reminder of what I was fighting for. And then fate handed me the opportunity. It was a rainy Thursday evening. Adam came home unusually quiet, his face pale, his phone clutched tightly in his hand. He didn't even greet me when he walked through the door. He just sat on the couch, head in his hands, muttering curses under his breath. I asked him what was wrong, and at first he brushed me off. But later that night, when he thought I was asleep, I heard him on the phone. His voice was shaky, desperate. Please just give me more time. I'll get the money, I swear. Don't do this to me. Money, debt, panic. Suddenly, the picture became clear. The man who mocked me for struggling was now drowning himself. And in that moment I knew. This was my chance. I lay in bed that night, my heart pounding in the dark, listening to Adam's trembling voice on the phone. His words replayed in my head like a broken record. Please just give me more time. I'll get the money, I swear. Don't do this to me. This was the same man who laughed at my poverty. The same man who humiliated me for years, mocking my struggles as though they were stains on my character. Yet here he was, terrified, powerless, drowning in a storm he thought he'd never face. And that's when it hit me. Life has a cruel but perfect way of balancing the scales. The next morning, I tried to act normal. I made coffee, placed it in front of him, and watched as his hands shook while he scrolled through his phone. He didn't touch the cup. His eyes were swollen from lack of sleep. Finally, I asked softly, "Is everything okay?" He looked at me like I was a stranger intruding into his life. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes, real fear. He snapped back, "It's nothing. Don't worry about it." But his trembling gave him away. And I realized something important. Adam didn't trust me with his pain. Funny, isn't it? I was expected to endure his mockery, carry his cruelty, and still stand by his side. But when he crumbled, he shut me out. Days went by, and his behavior grew stranger. He stayed out late, avoided phone calls in front of me, and spent hours locked in his office. Once I caught him slamming his desk drawer shut when I entered. Curiosity gnawed at me. I couldn't shake the thought that his perfect image was nothing more than a fragile mask, and underneath he was rotting. One evening, when he stepped into the shower, I finally gave in. I checked his desk. Inside, I found a stack of unopened envelopes, letters stamped in red with the words "Final Notice," credit card bills, overdue payments, even threats of legal action. Adam, the man who mocked me for being poor, was drowning in debt. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The hypocrisy was staggering. He had ridiculed me for years about my financial struggles. Yet he was on the brink of losing everything. But here's the difference. When I was broke, I fought. I clawed my way through it with grit and dignity. Adam, on the other hand, had spent so much time pretending to be untouchable that when reality came crashing down, He collapsed like a house of cards. And that night, as I stood in the dim glow of his office lamp, holding those letters in my shaking hands, a strange calmness washed over me. This was it. This was the turning point. For years, he had treated me like a joke. But now the tables had turned. From that moment on, I changed. I stopped reacting to his insults. I stopped letting his words sting. Adam thought I was still the same woman he mocked. But what he didn't know was that every time he laughed at me, he sharpened the knife I would one day use to cut him out of my life. And soon, very soon, he would learn that the woman he thought was weak was the one holding the power. After discovering Adam's debts, everything about the way I looked at him changed. When he laughed at me now, it no longer hurt. When he dismissed me as too sensitive or not classy enough, I no longer cried into my pillow. Instead, I just looked at him, really looked at him. And all I saw was a man crumbling under the weight of his own arrogance. And the most satisfying part? He had no idea that I knew his secret. Adam's behavior grew more frantic with each passing week. He snapped at small things, paced the house at odd hours, and made phone calls in hushed tones, his voice sharp and panicked. I pretended not to notice. At dinners, he'd still make his little jokes. She thinks budgeting is a hobby, he'd laugh in front of his friends. And I'd smile politely, sipping my water, while imagining the repossession letters piling up in his drawer. But while Adam was spiraling, I was planning. I started preparing silently, carefully, like a chess player setting up for checkmate. I opened a private savings account. Every bit of freelance work I did, every extra dollar I earned, went into that account. I began quietly reconnecting with old friends and mentors Adam had pushed me away from. Building a network, something he thought I never had. I started journaling every single cruel comment he made, every insult, every time he belittled me in front of others. I didn't know if I'd ever use it, but part of me wanted proof, evidence of the years I had endured. The more I built in silence, the stronger I felt. Meanwhile, Adam's mask was slipping fast. He glared at me like I was the enemy. The bank. My investors. Everyone. They think I'm finished. Finished. The word hung in the air between us. I almost pitied him, almost. But then I remembered every dinner where I had been his punchline. Every friend who had laughed at my expense because he gave them permission to. Every tear I had shed in silence. No, I didn't pity him. Not anymore. That night, he drank himself into a stupor. As he passed out on the couch, I sat across from him, notebook in hand, quietly observing. And in that moment, I realized, Adam wasn't just falling. He was inviting me to push. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about justice. Justice for every insult. Justice for every humiliation. Justice for every time he made me feel small while hiding his own weakness. And I promised myself, as I closed my notebook and turned off the lamp, when the time comes, I won't just leave Adam. I'll make sure he understands what it feels like to be betrayed by the person you trust most. When you plan revenge, you learn two things fast. Patience is a weapon, and timing is everything. I didn't want to win in anger. I wanted the kind of victory that left no room for doubt. The kind that rewrote the story everyone had told about me for so long. For years I'd been the punchline. For years I'd been the cute struggler. I wanted the record cleared. I wanted the truth to sit heavy on his chest the way his lies had sat on mine. So I waited. While Adam spiraled, I was steady. I opened that secret savings account. I reconnected with friends who had useful skills, and I quietly learned about the tiny cracks his empire had. I had those final notice bills. I had the envelopes stamped with threats. I had the notes about missed payrolls. I had proof he was unstable financially. But proof alone wasn't enough. I needed context, witnesses, and timing. First step, control the narrative. Adam loved his image. He lived on presentation. Dinners with investors, photos on LinkedIn, curated Instagram posts that showed him shaking hands at conferences. He thought the world only saw the glossy surface. I knew the world also listened for rumors. So I began seeding two things at once. Credibility and consequence. I arranged small dinners with people he'd underestimated. My old university professor who still had ties to the startup circles Adam moved in, a former colleague of his who had left quietly, and a woman who'd been burned by one of Adam's unfinished projects years ago. I didn't blast accusations at them. I asked questions. I let the right stories surface. I let them remember the late nights they'd been denied, the meetings that had been canceled, the paychecks that never materialized. People remember what they already suspect. They just need a nudge to speak up. Second step, strategic exposure. There are honest ways to expose a liar. Legal ways. Ways that don't pull you into the mud. I took those ways. I started by asking for copies of contracts from his small LLC. He had filed paperwork with investors and with the small local business association. Those filings were public record. I spent evenings in municipal offices reading through filings and cross-referencing dates. I found inconsistencies, promised deliverables that never existed, payroll entries that didn't match bank statements, payments to companies with no presence. The math didn't lie, but facts are cold on a page. They are persuasive only when you know who to show them to. So I put together a small binder, a neat, professional pack that a lawyer would be proud of, bank statements, copies of past invoices, emails where Adam promised deliverables he couldn't meet, and the final notices. I didn't add my own commentary. It was better that way. Let the documents speak. Third step, the audience. A lie survives in private. It dies in public. Adam's investors were my main audience. They had money on the table and pride in what they'd backed. Pride sways fast when it realizes it was hijacked. I reached out to one of Adam's smaller angel investors. Not to gossip, not for schadenfreude, but to ask quietly and strategically for a meeting. I told him I had concerns and evidence of irregularities. He agreed to meet me in a neutral place. A small conference room at a co-working space, where nothing could be spun without witnesses. I was calm when I walked in. I spread the binder in front of him like an offering nobody would refuse. He scanned the pages, brow furrowing, voice low. This doesn't look good. He asked if I had more. I did. I offered access to the cloud folder where everything was stored. I watched his face change, from skeptical to alarmed. Within 48 hours, a couple of his contacts had quietly begun to ask questions. Investors hate being blindsided. They hate uncertainty even more. I didn't have to shout. The way I'd always been treated, dismissed, mocked, made my calm credible. When people who'd once dismissed me as sensitive, now saw me presenting facts with quiet clarity, it landed. It landed hard. Fourth step. Force accountability where it hurt most. Adam had a quarterly pitch and wine event he loved. A night where he showcased progress to his investors and pretended everything was on track. He had been scheduling the next one, boasting about major updates and closing rounds. That night was sacred in his calendar. I sent my investor contact an email with a subject line that was blandly professional. Urgent. Documentation for tonight's investor review. Attached were selected pages from the binder, anonymized for discretion. I didn't tell him what I planned. I only nudged that the meeting that night was a disaster for Adam. People asked hard questions he couldn't answer. His slides, once triumphant, now read like fiction to a room of financially literate people. Someone in the back, an executive from a mid-size firm, pulled up corporate records on his phone and quietly compared numbers. The polite smiles faded. The investors huddled privately. I waited in the audience because I had been told the event was public. I watched as the man who had mocked me for being addicted to struggling tried to script a recovery in real time, and failed. And after the meeting, the fallout began. Emails demanding clarifications. Cold calls from distant relatives who asked blunt questions. One by one, the resources he had trusted began to withdraw. I didn't orchestrate every move. I simply made sure the truth had a place to land. Fifth step, the personal blow. If the investors were the structural strike, the personal humiliation had to be precise. For years Adam had enjoyed an audience of friends who would laugh at my expense because he gave them permission. They cheered him on, celebrated his success. I wanted those same people to understand the kind of man they'd been applauding. I didn't make a scene. I laid out evidence in places where it would sting. An email to the group chat his friends used, written not in accusation but in clarity. I wrote a short, calm message outlining the inconsistencies and the decisions that had led to missed payrolls. I attached an invoice. I didn't absolve him. I didn't name call. I simply showed them the facts. The responses were immediate. People who had laughed at me now had to reconcile that laughter with unpaid employees, with promises broken to their own contacts. The network around him started to shift. Invitations stopped. The group photos on social media, those staged collages of successful friends, thinned out. He noticed. He began to look over his shoulder. He called late at night, voice hoarse, asking, "Who have you told?" I answered plainly, "People who needed to know." He begged. He pleaded. He tried to charm. He offered money, offered access, and finally, in desperation, accused me of betrayal. Betrayal? He spat, the word ricocheting off the plaster walls. "You betrayed me." I let him say it. The irony tasted like copper in my mouth. He had thought it was easy to humiliate me. He had thought he could mock my past and erase his own failings. Now when his empire buckled, he wanted me to sew it back together. No. I had one final move before I closed the door for good. Sixth step, the public mirror. There is nothing quite as humiliating as watching a man fail when he's been flaunting a false image. I didn't need a viral video, nor did I want to drag him through every platform. What I wanted was a public, formal accountability he couldn't spin. The truth in a place that mattered to him. A week after the investor fallout, I arranged for a quiet meeting at his office during a board review, with his key backers and two of his closest friends present. I had no dramatic entrance. I walked in like someone who'd come to collect what was due. I handed over a simple packet. Copies of the documentation, the timeline, and a clear, concise narration of events. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I told the story again, calmly, from the perspective of someone who had watched him lie for years. That was the night his world tilted. One of his investors stood, face red, and asked him to leave the room. Another asked for an accounting of payroll, specifically asking why employees had been let go without notice. His friends fidgeted and exchanged looks that smelled of betrayal themselves. It was a courtroom without a judge, only a jury of peers, disappointed and betrayed. He stumbled, tried to explain, tried the old charm. But charm doesn't fix ledgers. Charm doesn't pay people. The board voted to suspend funding pending an audit. A legal notice went out. Adam walked out of that meeting hollow-eyed, the same way I'd walked out of that restaurant years ago when he mocked me in public, except the roles had reversed. For once, the laughter was not with him. Seventh step, reclaiming myself. The dust settled quickly after that. He received a flurry of calls, messages, and finally, a notice from his landlord about unpaid rent. I won't pretend I felt unalloyed joy. This was still a man I'd loved, and I carried grief for the loss of what might have been. But inside that grief was something else, fierce, bright, and clean. Liberation. I used that period to build the life I'd always wanted without permission. I took the small freelance contracts I'd hoarded for myself and turned them into a steady stream. I re-enrolled in the course I'd abandoned, and this time I finished projects knowing they were for me. I met with mentors who helped polish my resume and connected me to people whose respect was earned and honest. The final part of my plan was mercy, or at least a dignified exit. I didn't drag him through social media. I didn't leak lurid stories about his affair or his panic. I let the legal and professional consequences do the speaking. When he finally knocked on my door, begging for help, for a loan, for the warmth of the life he had squandered, I met him with the calm I'd nurtured through months of preparation. "Why?" he asked once, choking on the word. "Because you taught me what I will never be again," I said simply. "You taught me that humiliation is a teacher. You taught me that strength can come from pain. And you taught me that I owe myself more than I owe the image of another man." He wanted to blame me. He wanted the easy narrative, that the woman he mocked had betrayed him in return. But anyone who had been there, Anyone who had watched and listened knew the truth. He had made his bed of lies. I simply showed the world where it was built. When the dust finally settled, life felt both strangely empty and unbearably full. Empty because a chapter had closed, the chapter with Adam in it, and full because for the first time in years, I had space to fill my days with my own choices. The weeks after the board meeting were quiet at first, then loud in a way that made my stomach clench. Adam's phone calls turned frantic, then sparse, then stopped. The apartment we shared returned to its natural state. Mine. I walked through rooms that had once echoed with his arrogance and found little markers of my own life. The mug I'd bought on a summer trip, the notebook where I scribbled ideas, the stack of unpaid invoices I'd been saving to pay until the world felt safer. People asked me if I felt guilty. They expected some messy, public drama, an alley of revenge stories to gossip over. But grief and vindication are not dramatic in that way. They are quiet forces that look like ordinary mornings. I woke up and made coffee. I went to classes. I answered emails. I took freelance jobs with a steadiness I'd never had the luxury of before. There were practical consequences for Adam. And that was part of the plan's grim honesty. Investors wrote curt messages. We are withdrawing our commitment pending audit. The landlord's notice arrived, politely worded but clear. His social feed, once glossy with travel photos and pumped-up captions about ambition, grew still. People he'd called friends stopped returning messages. I watched as the curated public life he'd maintained eroded like chalk under rain. But I also watched something else that mattered more. The people around me shifted. The friend who had once laughed at his jokes apologized with a simple text, "I'm sorry. I didn't see." A colleague who'd once given me patronizing smiles offered me a warm handshake and later a recommendation. Those small changes were not a measure of my success, but they were a marker of truth returning to a place where lies had been loud. I still had nights when the loneliness returned, when the ache of what might have been pressed cold into my chest. But those nights were fewer. My days filled with small triumphs. A term paper at home. I began to take inventory of what I actually wanted. For years I had clung to a single dream. Finish school, find stability, and maybe one day be able to breathe without counting cost. With Adam gone and his shadow lifting, I could finally make room for new goals. I enrolled in the course I had paused. I accepted a part-time position at a boutique design firm. I started writing again. Not social media posts about triumphs or revenge, but essays and short pieces about the messy texture of everyday survival. My words felt honest and raw, and they began to find an audience who understood what it meant to be both broken and capable. There were awkward encounters. Adam saw me at a coffee shop once months later, his presence smaller than I remembered. He approached with that old mixture of arrogance and pleading, like someone reaching for a bell that had already been rung. He asked for help in front of people he thought could be witnesses to his transformation. I listened. He stumbled through apologies, excuses dressed as humility, offers of money, requests for a last chance. He tried to reconstruct himself the way someone would tape a broken ornament and display it on a shelf. I didn't humiliate him. I didn't hand him pamphlets on rebuilding trust. I said two sentences that have settled with me ever since. You taught me how to forgive myself. I won't teach you how to beg. Then I walked away. Healing for me was a series of small, deliberate acts. I met Daniel regularly. We made pancakes on Sunday mornings, clumsy at first, then perfect in their own way. He'd make a joke and I'd laugh, feeling something unsteady and good grow between us that had nothing to do with the old shame of lost years. He would tell stories of the tiny things he had done to remember me. A boat he'd considered buying the summer I was born. The wrench he kept because it reminded him of the first time he changed a tire. We traded stories and built rituals, small anchors that made ordinary life feel sacred. Professionally, things shifted too. The freelance clients I'd once done out of necessity became long-term collaborators. I accepted a role that paid less than I'd hoped at first but offered mentorship and space to develop skills. The woman who once couldn't sleep from worry now had meetings to prepare for, deadlines to meet, people to help. The busyness was different, it was mine. And because I believe in the full arc of justice, I'll tell you what happened to the people who had once been complicit in Adam's rise. Some distanced themselves publicly, others quietly paid back old debts and moved on. People have short memories for scandal if it doesn't touch their pockets. But there was one thing I could not stand for: rewriting the story. I kept copies of the binder I'd made, not to wield as a weapon, but as a truth the world could consult. If anyone tried to sanitize what had happened, the documents were there, quiet, factual, weighty. Months turned into a year, and the edges of my life smooth. A client's praise, an email from someone thanking me for an article that made them feel less alone. People asked me sometimes if I'd ever go back to Adam if he begged. The answer was simple: no. Not because I am proud, but because I have learned the value of choosing myself. There is a difference between forgiveness and return. I forgave in the way that releases poison from your veins. I did not return to a life that had neither respect nor truth. When the story finally quieted in the public eye, I was left with an unexpected gift: clarity. I could see, with terrible and beautiful clarity, the kind of life I wanted. Not a life stitched out of someone else's reputation. Not a life built on the currency of other people's laughter. I wanted a life where my work mattered to me, where my friends were honest, where my love was respected and reciprocated. If there is a moral here, stripped of melodrama, it is this: respect precedes love. You can have the warmest words, the most tender moments, but without basic respect, without seeing another person as full and worthy, those words are just noise. And when someone uses your pain for a laugh or a show, that person has already taught you the truth about themselves. I don't wish ruin on people as a pastime. I don't think revenge is a sport. What I did was practical, precise, and rooted in self-preservation. It was a reclamation, not a spectacle. And the reclamation changed me in ways I am still discovering. Now, when I sit in cafes and write, or when I go to a lecture and raise my hand, I feel the quiet satisfaction of someone living with integrity. I own my days. I pay my bills on time. I answer messages from the past with a simple kindness that does not forget. I no longer pretend to be small so others feel larger. One evening, Daniel and I walked along the river, the lights reflecting like small, honest stars in the water. He took my hand and said softly, "You could have been anything." I laughed, because the truth felt too big and too tender to hold in one sentence. I was always becoming something, I told him. I just needed to stop letting other people write my story. The envelope that once shattered me had, in the end, been the match that lit a room that had too long been kept in the dark. The flame didn't consume me. It warmed me. It showed me what I had built, and what I still could build. My life after Adam is not perfect. It is real. It is mine. And that, more than any revenge or public reckoning, is the victory I choose to live with.